Afternoon, everyone. Good morning, wherever you are in the world. Hello, welcome to AI Would Agree. Today's episode is a little bit different to what we normally do. So I'm going to, in a moment, I'm going to introduce our guest, but I've had quite a lot of conversations over recent weeks and months around behavioural science and behavioural design, and it feels like it's a field that's on the tips of everybody's lips, and everybody wants to know about it, and everybody thinks that they do it, and everybody wants to do it. Whether they actually do it or not, they probably do it without realizing. And we're going to have a guest on today that can tell us whether that's maybe a dangerous thing, whether it's a good thing. We've got lots of different topics to cover as part of what we're doing today. You will, as part of today's conversation, get a bit of a sneak peek of some of the screens from our solutions. Don't worry, it's not a sales pitch. But as a SaaS AI business, we acknowledge very much that what we do interacts with people specifically. Contact centers, which is where we focus our energies, are a people business, both customers and agents. And we've always employed behavioral science and behavioral design in order to make sure that employees feel engaged with the technology that they're using, and that the customers get the right outcomes from the agents themselves through the use of the principles. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Babs Crane, who's our resident behavioural scientist and behavioural design expert. Oh, I said all of that without tripping myself over. Hello.
That was very impressive. Thanks for having me.
Awesome to have you along. I think this has been one of the shows that kind of everybody's been asking about in advance. I think it's widely acknowledged that everybody's interested in it, and it's still fairly new in terms of accreditation and sort of the organizations that regulate it and where that's going, and lots of interest and movement on those topics. But Babs, if you just want to give us a couple of minutes intro to yourself, how you got involved in behavioral science in the first place, what your passion is for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's quite a long history, to be honest. It's been a long time in the making, really. So my background and my work specifically kind of sits straddling across two camps: psychology and design. Behavioral design is kind of a nice catch-all term for that, but I'll go into a little bit of that as well in a minute, because it kind of gets defined in two different ways. So it's good to make that distinction. But my academic history is in psychology, and specifically consumer psychology, which is what I have a master's degree in. And I kind of came into that world in a slightly less conventional way, which makes it sound like really cool. But it's I discovered it through the world of work, basically. So I didn't. This isn't something that I studied at the age of 18, and kind of went through the conventional education path with. So I was actually earlier in my career working in sales, internal sales, internal account management. So not necessarily like strictly call center work, but very much employed to develop business to business relationships. And my main method of doing that was by speaking to people over the phone. So I had quite an early touch point in my career with how kind of like framing effects, as we know them in the world of behavioral science, but how you can make quite big differences on how people interact with you, with quite seemingly small changes in what you ask them, or how you ask something, or the way something's framed. So I was really interested in that. And then also there was other elements in my early career with the company that I worked for. They did a lot of training in personality profiling, like lots of psychometric stuff. And again, that was really interesting to understand a bit more about humans. So I was reading lots of stuff, and in the end, I just thought, look, I'm going to read things that have been properly curated by actual experts. Therefore, I did a degree. And actually, another example of how framing effects can, like introduce some good behavior. I framed my entire studies as a hobby, just to keep me on it and keep me committed to it, rather than thinking, oh, this is a great big burden, I've got to do this. So yeah, it all kind of developed from there. And then quite early on, I shifted into the creative world, working as a graphic designer, and particularly looking at graphic design and web design, like obviously front end web design. And when I first started studying about cognitive psychology, which is like the study of how perception, what makes us pay attention to something, how do we learn things, what makes us remember things. I suddenly saw this amazing crossover between the two worlds that obviously I hadn't seen before, because when you first tell people you kind of work across the domains of psychology and design, people instinctively kind of go, well, how does that work? Because a lot of people's assumption of psychology is that it's like a therapeutic thing, which obviously that is a huge part of psychology, but there's lots of different disciplines of it. So yeah, I just kind of, it's naturally over the last 10 years progressed along that way. And in that time, earlier in that period, I was studying as well. And then I decided to specialize in the area that kind of was the bigger catch-all area of consumer psychology, which kind of covers pretty much everything. What makes us buy things or interact with things in the way that we do? What is it about our psychology that makes us behave and do those things? So it's fascinating. It's a really interesting world.
Thanks. That's probably one of the best intros we've had so far from someone. Thanks very much for sharing. Yeah, there's a few things that kind of come out of that, and one of the things that I want to get across to people watching today is, like, what I don't want is the misconception that the only thing Babs does for us is kind of help make our solutions look nice and pretty. She does really do a fantastic job of making them stand out, and it's one of the few things that when we show it to a new business, that one of the feedback from that business is always how fantastically different it looks and how it blows them away. And I can assure you that's more by design than chance, because Babs has absolutely spent hours and hours on our user interfaces and making them do what she needs them to do and what we wanted to get out of each individual screen. But there is actually a part beyond that where Babs sort of consults with lots of different businesses, and especially around contact center work. I think it's fair to be said that there's a lot of scope for behavioral science and behavioral design. Not just in, people might probably jump straight to scripting, because how you say something to a customer can be really powerful, and that's true. But there's also conversations to be had there around sort of processes and ideas behind, things that are pretty prevalent at the moment in the insurance industry, which is things like loyalty and retention. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I don't want to leave you swimming in a pool of what on earth do I talk about there. So I'm going to give you a start for 10 is, for people who are aware of behavioral science, are there dangers in using it without fully understanding it themselves?
Yeah. In a very succinct answer, yes. And of course, I've done, I think, seven years of academic study, and obviously then all the other years of working in industry. Yes, there is. So obviously we're all human. So and that's great, because when you start talking about behavioral science, people, it's so relatable, right? Because it's all about our human behavior and we're all humans. So excellent. So we can all relate to it. And the lovely thing about behavioral science, but this is where it kind of becomes slightly tricky, is that when you start talking about some principles of behavioral science, people kind of go, oh yeah, of course I do that, or oh yeah, we all do that, don't we? And behavioral science, just to give a bit of background, because obviously many people have heard of it, but there are plenty of people who also haven't as well. So it's really become popular in the last 10 years because primarily of 2 Nobel Prizes being won, which is fantastic. That obviously really kind of gives it some authority out there to show people that this really holds, this stuff, like is really, it's got some good substance behind it. But obviously that's led to like lots of people suddenly being aware of it. And a lot of the patterns that have come with behavioral science is that we're really aware of like these cognitive biases. That, again, that's a term that if anyone's kind of had a bit of a touch point with behavioral science, they may well have heard that term, or they might know things such as loss aversion, social proof. And these are all terms that are really widely used within behavioral science. And they can be like introducing some of these concepts in, like scripting in this example, or on communications in general, on websites perhaps, or any kind of marketing communications. It has been shown to elicit some like really quite strong responses. The concept of loss aversion, just to give an explainer of that, is that we feel the fear of having a loss far greater than an equivalent gain. And even like a study that was published, I think about 2 weeks ago, I've just read it only yesterday, like there's more studies showing that we apply much more effort to avoid having a loss compared to how much effort we'll put into trying to get the equivalent gain. In gambling terms, which is not where this should be applied at all, but it's a way that we can relate to it. Say we're at a horse race, we put £10 on a horse and we lose that £10. Obviously we'll feel really like quite a bit of angst about that. If it's more money, then we'll feel it even more. It would probably take about an equivalent win of about £20 to kind of reset the emotional balance from losing that initial 10. It's nearly double, basically. That's the kind of ratio that we have there. So behavioural science and a lot of the literature that's come out as a result of these Nobel Prizes being won obviously really highlights that, and it's fantastic because these are quite small changes that like to redevelop the copy of an email, for example, or a landing page on a website, or some scripting in a contact center is relatively low in cost, and you can have really like big gains as a result of that. But there are always individual differences at play here, and there's lots of things that that you need to kind of consider with regards to the audience. There are people who are definitely more loss averse than not, and that's where having that underpinning of psychology really does help to inform when that's going to be the best strategy to introduce which cognitive biases at what point. And it's something that because it's so exciting and everyone really enjoys it because we're all human, like there's been so much interest in it, but there are bodies out there now that are being established to kind of help to standardize the industry, which hopefully will then make it better for everybody, the companies that employ it. But there's one, I'm a member of the Global Association of Applied Behavioural Scientists, which shortens down to GABS, and the whole point of that is kind of to help standardize the industry. So the people who are members of that can only be a member if they've got the postgraduate qualifications in relevant areas, or if they've got extensive working experience over a number of years. And obviously, because part of that are the ethical considerations as well, because as a psychologist, from day dot, the minute you run the most basic of all experiments, you have ethics boards that you have to kind of get through at university and what have you to really standardize what you're doing. So yes, there's obviously the minute people learn about it and you can see how it's applied in the real world, there's lots of examples of it. The organ donation changes in the UK in recent years, and automatic enrolment on pensions, workplace pensions, that's all been done as as a result of behavioural science and the research behind it. So that's a really big example of how that can be really effective. But obviously you need to consider how it is mutually beneficial and how it isn't going to negatively impact the end user, be it a customer, be it a member of staff, or whoever it might be. And that's something that is definitely, thankfully, because of GABS now coming on board and starting to standardize the industry. And I'm also a member of the British Psychological Society as well. So I'm not sure if you're still there, Paul.
I am indeed.
You just disappeared for a minute then.
Yeah, the beauty of having a magic mouse and over ready to do the next event. So what I want to show you next, what I'm conscious of is what I don't want this to become is kind of a sales pitch from us. That's exactly what it's not. But what I do want to show people is some examples of how we've added behavioral science and behavioral design into elements of what we've done. Because what I like about how we work about things is kind of add some scalability to what you do as a consultant. So, on your own, you can impact a small teams of people and small groups of people. But by multiplying that by adding it to software and capabilities like that, then you can really make a much wider impact on a huge group of people. So Obviously, a little bit about us. If you do know us, which you probably do if you're watching this, we do have 3 solutions. We've got our speech analytics platform, Phonetic. We have a coaching platform that uses data science to filter the best results, who to coach, what to coach them on, to team leaders, leaving the team leaders free to kind of get on with the coaching as opposed to spend all their time analysing things. And then we have Playbook, which is our next best action and conversational guidance tool. And that really helps guide agents to the best outcomes, not just for themselves, but for the customers as well. To make sure that, even if they're not familiar with a particular customer journey, they can get where they need to be. Now, for all of these tools, there are elements within all of the user interface and the outcomes for the customers that we've extensively used behavioral design for. Playbook itself is probably the most extensive user of this. So, you can imagine we've got conversational guidance on one side of the screen. So we've gone through customer journeys. We've understood what the happy path for your customer looks like, no matter what their call contact reason is. No matter what they might want to discuss on that call, we can help guide the agent through that process. You can have scripting there showing on the side. You can kind of just say, make it out. I don't know how big it is on everyone else's screen. If you're watching this on mobile, I apologize. But you can see there on the screen on the right-hand side, yes, there are elements of behavioral science in terms of what we say to people. But Babs, do you want to talk us through some of the more visual elements of what we can see there?
Yeah, and I think that's a really nice differentiation, like I kind of alluded to earlier on, because like behavioural design is known, or it's becoming more well known for sure, because people have it's a nice tangible output of behavioural science, but you can use it in 2 different ways. You can use it to try and elicit some kind of behaviour change in the person who's like on the receiving end of this, but you can also then use what we know about how perceptually we process things via like cognitive psychology, like I mentioned earlier on, to design something so it's more user friendly for the person who's also then using it. So this is kind of like you say, like there's obviously enhancements in the wording itself, but visually here, I mean, there's some points on the screen which I'll just kind of point out to you. Rounded shapes. This is a really important thing with regards to how we perceive things. We typically think that rounded shapes, or we feel that rounded shapes are friendlier. And because we actually find it quite easy to think of things like inanimate objects with some kind of like human aspect, which, bear with me, because I know sometimes this kind of on first hit sounds kind of hard to get your head around, but we do it with shapes. We do it with brands themselves. We find it really, really easy to think of a brand, and our brains do think of a brand in the same way that we might think of other people. So we really look at the way that we can introduce friendliness and that concept of people wanting to therefore interact with something via the way things are designed. So in this example, there's rounded edges on everything. That feels nice and easy to look at. People, that conversation box there is going to be like the main focus, so that is the most salient thing on the page there, but it's not bright red to get the attention to it. We've used like the blues and purples there, which, because people are going to be dwelling on that area for quite some time, that's going to be easier for them to engage with and to stick with. We've also utilised some mental models, so it's quite easy for people to, if somebody walked in and sat down having never used the system before, they could easily see that that's a conversation window, and it's given to people in like step by step. So that's what is known as progressive disclosure. So you're not giving everybody the full hit of the information at once. It's being fed to them in a timely manner when they need it, so they're not then cognitively overloaded, because we can only really hold a really small amount of information in like the tops of our minds. So if we've got a lot given to us on a screen, it's really easy to become majorly overwhelmed. So it's using these principles to keep people engaged with it, and so therefore people are going to use it much more effectively. But then we also do then have, when we need them to pay attention to the other side of the screen for recommendations, then their attention can be directed across that way as well. So we're employing those principles throughout the whole of this.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of the time we've talked about this quite a bit recently in terms of scripting. You know, like the first thing a lot of people say to me is, "Oh, you're going to introduce a script. Oh, actually, that's going to add to my average handling time for my contacts. We don't want to add any extra cost to the business. We want to do this for the same price." Actually, what we see when we deploy something like Playbook is actually we reduce that average handling time, and the reason for it is that you know, quite a lot of the time when you're looking at scripts within a call center, they're paper scripts, they're kind of laminate pieces of paper, or they're dotted all over the work booth that the person's in, or all over the wall if they're at home. The beauty of something like Playbook is it's giving you exactly where you need to be at any one given point in time. So you're not spending ages trying to scan through and figure out where you are. And I think that the beauty of that as well is it means that the agent themselves can kind of focus on treating the customer as a customer, not as a problem that needs to be solved. Because I think
Yeah.
a lot of conversations kind of fall down because the agent is so engrossed in trying to fix their problem rather than actually trying to, well, remembering that they're a person, that they're a real live person. You know, it kind of helps keep that personal touch to it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so moving on to Phonetic, which is our conversation analytics platform. One of the parts of our platform that makes it really unique is kind of being able to build our own machine learning model for specific, more complex contact types. So specifically, we do this for things like negotiation, if it's in sales world, or vulnerable customer propensity modeling as well. So it allows our customers to kind of build out their own model, whatever that looks like for specifically for their business, around their jargon, their products and services, and the things that their customers say to them. But unfortunately, it is quite a mundane process to keep that model up to date with information and score effectively the machine's homework for it. So what you can see in that screen there is us scoring a conversation based on both the transcript and the audio file as to whether that customer was engaged in that call with negotiations. Now, all the agent has to do is click yes or no at the point where they've seen that that's happened in the call, goes away, and it'll score that itself against what it thought would happen, and it'll add to that propensity model in the background. But Babs, could you just take us through, just really quickly, kind of how we've gotten around that mundane job process being kind of made a little bit more exciting?
Yeah, definitely. So this is one of the things that I built into the designs quite early on this one. Firstly, the grayed out boxes on there, that's another form of progressive disclosure, like I mentioned on the last slide. So people, when they would first hit this screen, they can see a snapshot of what's going to come up, so they know what to expect. So obviously then to help them gauge how much time they've got to do it. But this is basically using a commitment device. And it's playing on this cognitive bias that we have, which is commitment bias. And that is that when we actually commit in to do something, we're much more likely to do it. And sometimes it takes a click of that button and to schedule that time. So it's quite small, but those purple, the blue, purple, and red pills at the top is a place where somebody can say, right, I've got 5, 10, or 15 minutes. And I will do it for this amount of time. And then when they hit start training, those conversations and the audio player will then become, completely visible. They'll, like you say, they click yes or no. So they've just got to listen, read, click yes or no. And as the timer's counting down, they'll be able to see how far along. So they've got a progress indicator the whole way through, which again, we know from something called the goal gradient effect, that when we are closer to an end goal, we're much more likely to, again, disproportionately apply effort to reach that goal. So which is why a progress indicator is really important, because it's actually, it is very disproportionate. The closer we are, we really do then go, okay, well, we're going to push ourselves and get over the line. So the concept here is to break it down, create a commitment, and then show progress, so people then stick with it. And then right at the end of the process, they have a form of positive reinforcement, which is a way of then keeping people engaged to then make it more likely that they will then do that task again in the future, hopefully not too distant future as well.
And the really great things, like, and the thing is, I know that works with the agents in the contact centers, and the reason I know that works is because every time we demo this platform out and we take a potential customer through this process and show them how we build out that model, when we tell them that the man's super happy because he's gotten to the end of his little path, every single time we get a laugh. Because everybody gets excited that he's gotten to the end of his journey and he's done a little dance, and it's great. But there's actually, it's fascinating to hear the real world sort of science behind why that works and how it gets that commitment out of people. Unfortunately,
it's that whole concept that it's like things aren't quite as linear as we kind of hope they would be. So there's lots of disproportionate like effort being applied to one thing over another, and that again is like a prime example of it. It's those lovely quirks of human behavior.
And then the last bit that I've got to show everyone is part of our coaching platform. So again, we intentionally say that we help drive maximum value from every conversation. And we try to avoid limiting that to just sort of agents talking to customers, because we think there should be value from the conversations with team leaders to agents and head of departments to team leaders and so on. So coaching is a big thing that we're all super passionate about here at TMAC. And getting the coaching platform where it is it hasn't been an easy process. It's probably had the most redesigns. It's our oldest product in terms of when it was initially built. It's gone through the most iterations, and it is easily the most staggeringly beautiful when you load it up on the screen. It's very simple to look at and easy to understand. And I think a lot of our motivation for that is that you can have the best toolkit in the world, but if people don't want to use it and then they won't engage with it. And if they don't engage with it, then you've just wasted your money. It really doesn't matter what your features and benefits are. If people don't want to use something, they absolutely won't use it. And with something that's as close to people's heart as performance management and feedback, as you can see there, we absolutely had to get that 100% right. Now, point out for everybody, the focus for us has never been to kind of make sure that the coaching's happened. That is a byproduct of what we do, but that's not the goal of what we're getting at. What we wanted to do with this was to make sure that we got to the right outcomes from every coaching conversation. The goal was obviously to increase speed to competency, but for us, being able to measure the impact each coaching conversation had with people was paramount. So Babs, I guess, do you want to walk us through some of the bits and pieces you can see on the coaching performance screen, please?
Yeah, definitely. So this one definitely is the most colourful one that I did, for good reason. It needs to feel like people need to be able to dwell on it for a long time, but they need to be able to really easily see performance and how people are engaged against what they're being targeted to. But and this is from the feedback that I had when I was working with the product team. Just like I suppose maybe a more wider observation from the industry is like a lot of coaching, specifically because we have like business goals that we need people to be hitting certain KPIs, but it can quite easily go into a fairly negative frame. And so one of the features that actually I think is just underneath this screenshot, but something that I was really keen to build in, again, this is where you use behavioural design to inform colours and shapes and layouts. The use of a face there, again, will instantly direct attention to it, because we've got like a whole part of our brain is just there specifically to perceive faces. It's why we see faces in like slices of toast and railings and coat hangers and stuff. So we're hardwired for that. So that's to direct the attention there. But then just below that, there's a way that people can give kudos to staff members, and it seems like it's a fairly straightforward thing, and people would probably say, well, of course I'd like, if somebody had hit a KPI that they've been set on a previous coaching session, then the next coaching session hopefully would start with, oh, well done, you hit that KPI. But it might be some time between when they actually hit the KPI and the next review, or there might not even be a follow-up review for whatever reason. However, this system is there to prompt that user, the coach, to give instant positive feedback to the people that they can see has hit that particular KPI. And it's a principle that's come from behaviorism, which is like been around since like the 1940s, and it's all to do with like how we learn, which obviously can affect our behavioral outputs. And it's the concept that, you know, if somebody does something that is a good thing for them and for you, it's a desired behavior. If you give a positive reinforcer of that, then they're more likely to then do that again. And it'll encourage that behavior. But one of the key components of this is it has to be given in a really timely manner. So by building that into the platform, it enables the coach to be able to really get that out there at the best opportunity for it to be the most effective, rather than waiting for like the next face-to-face engagement or whatever it might be. So it's just ways that we can introduce that behavioural science and these principles from psychology in a way that works with a SaaS product to, you know, drive that kind of the positive employee engagement, which ultimately then will help the consumers at the end of it as well. So
Fantastic.
it shows it's mutually beneficial, hopefully.
And you know, I really enjoy every aspect of the role that I get to do, because we touch on so many different aspects of how to best get productivity outcomes from humans. And I think it's, you know, it's not something that anybody can say that, like, it's not a computer game you can see you've completed it, right? If we're always learning, we're always figuring out what's happening next. And I love the time that I spend with Babs, listening to all the different concepts and understanding it in so much more detail. But please, if anybody's out there and kind of interested to hear a bit more, please feel free to reach out to Babs. Obviously, she's linked as a speaker on the event. But Babs, if you wanted to drop your contact details or whatever you want in the comments afterwards, I'm sure everybody who's watching this back or watching it recorded later on, perhaps they can kind of reach out to you and get your advice on whatever they need to. Likewise, everybody watching this and they want to see demos of our solutions, please feel free, reach out, have a chat with me. I don't bite unless you want me to. Feel free to do some networking. I'm always up for a virtual coffee. Doesn't matter what time of day it is, I will always have one more coffee with anyone. Babs, thanks very much for your time today. It's been great to meet you again. And hopefully everybody can take something away from today. There's lots of interesting points for everybody.
No, thank you. It's been great.
Thanks very much. See you later.
Cheers. See ya.